can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Weisz.
Dr. Jeremy Weisz here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. And Craig, I always like to mention some past guest episodes. You know, since this is kind of in the realm of a lot of digital agencies use Craig's platform and company. So I was like, who else have I had on? I've had Jason Swank on. He runs a big group and helps digital agencies. You could check that episode out. I had Wes Matthews, who talked about growing his agency to $6.5 million and then selling it and staying on and just doing what he loves to do. So there's a lot more podcasts. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to some other people in the industry who I know. Todd Taskey from Potomac Business Capital, who basically helps agencies sell their business. And Duncan Allen, who's a master of social media, Firebelly Marketing, and Drew Hendricks, who specializes in wineries and winery suppliers at Barrels Ahead. Craig, I always there's so many different niches that people serve, and you probably get this. So I'm going to introduce you formally in a second, and also Chalk Digital. But before I do, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. And what we do is we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships by helping you run your podcast. And, you know, for me, Craig, it's always the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my relationships and profile them and the companies and people I admire. And I've done that over the past over a decade, by having them on my podcast. So I tell everyone, just like you should have a website for your business, you should have a podcast. And not only does it, allow you to, really profile their people, it builds content. If you asked me to write a post, Craig, it would take me 5 years. I will not do it, but I will be able to talk. And I've been publishing almost 2 episodes a week for almost 10 years. And you can do that through a podcast. So if you've ever thought of doing a podcast, I think you should, but you could always email me with questions, or us. You can go to rise25.com and learn more. I'm excited for today's guest, Craig Hagopian, and he started Chalk Digital in 2013 to democratize local advertising. And he's been doing this for decades. I don't want to age you, Craig, or anything, but you really helped pioneer location-based advertising as a service solution. And what Chalk does is they power advertising solutions. They're able to launch a campaign anywhere in the world in, I don't want to quote, but less than 7 minutes from start to finish. And that's from national brands, local businesses, and it helps automate local display, video, connecting TV advertising all in one. And he's been doing this for more than 30 years in technology and sales and consumer service marketing experience. And Craig, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. And you did a great job of thumbnailing me. Yep. You nailed me. Probably over 30 years.
Good. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing. We'll go back to one of the stories of a past company too that you founded, but let's start with Chalk for a second. And where does it come from? How did you come up with this idea?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I actually, I can kind of answer 2 questions at once here for you. I was actually the co-founder of Ground Truth, XAD, and we were in San Francisco, and we were having a business meeting on the outside of Embarcadero, and the shopkeeper's out there putting together his little sandwich signboard for the daily special. And we're watching them, and it probably took 15 minutes to do it. And then I said, wow, how many people are going to actually see that sign? And most people had their heads in the phones anyway, walking around. So they're not going to even see the sign anyway. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if they could just take a picture of that and broadcast it to 1,000 people instead of just a few hundred? And that was the birth of Chalk, because of the chalkboard. And digital is new school. So it's kind of a combination of old school and new school. And that's been kind of the democratization of what we've been doing. And we found that not only does an individual business care about that, but agencies can really sink their teeth into that kind of a capability. And so our whole platform today is for an agency to use these tools we've built for real-time advertising or real-time location-based marketing and business outreach.
Yeah, Craig, we'll dig deep on use cases because people
Sure.
love hearing use cases, but you know, it's famous last words, I guess, of an entrepreneur is like, what if, and whatever you're about to say, you're going to spend countless hours and, sleepless
Yeah.
nights. What made you decide when you thought of that this was something that you actually should execute on? Because I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you think about, and there's a lot of stuff you're busy at the time too. Why did you decide to move
Wow.
forward and do it?
What a great question. I've never been asked it that way, so I'll give you the answer that's clearly what drove it. So at the time, we were at Ground Truth XAD, which is more of a traditional technology platform, heavy on salespeople who work with agencies to run a campaign. And we were always confronted with having enough staff and enough operations, and it's very expensive to set that up. And so when I saw that chalkboard and I thought, well, everybody's posting today, like everybody should have a podcast. Well, everybody should be posting and creating content for social media.
100%.
And today everybody can do that. So I said, what if we took those two pieces and put them together? And that's really what the birth was about. We have an app today that you can actually take a photo of anything, a mug, a cup, and broadcast it to hundreds of people. In fact, we just finished working with Dog TV, and Dog TV is a channel for pets, not for humans. So when you go away and your dog will sometimes get anxiety because their masters or the family is gone, they'll kind of start to, act, crazy and maybe chew on something. And so Dog TV, actually, you put it on and it pacifies them and it makes them feel good. And it's blurred it's blurred to their eyes. I mean, you and I watched that TV, it looks a little off and the colors are weird, but for a dog, it's beautiful. And so what we did with the Dog TV, kind of side there, what we did with Dog TV is we built an app using our platform, and we're giving it to all the local shelters in the United States so they can take a picture of a pet and broadcast it to 1,000 families nearby, all free of service, because it's our social give back has been, pet adoption. And so it's really neat because what happens is, people who have no technology background, I mean, not to pick on shelters, but the pet loving people that run shelters are not usually your most technically advanced folks. And they get this app, they put it on their phone, Android or Apple, they can take a photo of the dog, add a couple things about, where the dog is, how old it is, what its name is, and then that creates the ad. And then we take it into our system in real time and throw it out to, nearby households. And it's a great way to accelerate getting the pets into great homes, and it's good for the dogs and it's great for the shelter, and it's obviously good for humans to have animals around. I'm a big believer in that. So anyway,
that's awesome.
That's just kind of an aside, but also the whole vision of what we were trying to work on, and still we're not done. I've been working on this since 2013. I'll probably be doing this in 2023, a decade from then. And it's all about just continuing to refine and make that process easier and more powerful. As anyone who's listening to your podcast today, especially an agency, they know how difficult local advertising is. It's hard to set up. It's hard to get some scoring. It's hard to get, results sometimes, especially when you're talking about offline or linear things. And so my big believer is that, you need to combine both online and offline to make the best program. And so hopefully we give those tools to a agency who's, supporting their clients.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of the business applications, and I love the component of offline, online to offline. But you mentioned the dog channel, the Dog TV. There is, when I was doing research about Chalk Digital, there is, people have used it for lost dogs for neighborhoods, right? And so, instead of putting, like, you picture that picture of the dog on like the telephone poles everywhere, which is kind of like Chalk Digital, right? Like people have used it for that application as well.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah. It works both ways. I think it's for us, it's always been, let's go to where we have an organized group of people who we can actually educate or, get them in their hands. It's harder when it's what we call C2C, consumer to consumer, because then I have to educate an individual consumer and how to download the app. It's all easy to do. It's just, it's very, what I call fragmented.
Yes. Totally.
So we've always gone where one webinar with 30 agencies at once, all, spread the capabilities in a much faster way. But absolutely, it does work for what I call consumer to consumer, personal advertising.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the different applications because even with Groupon, like Groupon, when it was the point,
Mm.
and it started off as like just trying to gather large people for advocating for moving that parking meter or whatever. And there's so many different applications, and obviously same thing with Chalk, right?
Yep.
So before we get into the business applications, XAD. Okay,
Mm.
so if people don't know what XAD is, it was established in 2009, the largest mobile local advertising network in the U.S. and offered targeted search, display, and a lot of other things, probably billions of business listings and requests every month and everything like that. So take me back to XAD for a second, and because there was some personal stuff that went on with XAD that I think would be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, it definitely was. Going back to the original discussion about where did Chalk come around, I was in San Francisco at that time, as I mentioned. I was also the co-founder of XAD, which now today is called Ground Truth. And we were growing just enormously. And in this space, you really need to be anchored in New York. San Francisco is great. It's the mega city for advertising and growing businesses on the West Coast, but you've got to have an East Coast presence. And so it was a decision made by the team that we need to move our business to New York. And I was one of the older guys on the team with a family, and to move, nothing against New York or living in New York, but just at that time it was a really hard thing to do. And so I had to actually kind of parachute out. And it's a really difficult thing to kind of give up one of your babies to move across the country. And so that actually, was a good thing for my family because, I was traveling constantly anyway. And probably if I kept on that path, who knows?
What was your family look like at that time with kids?
Wife and two kids that were in there, like one was like 9 and the other one was 12.
Yeah.
Right.
So you would be ostracized from your family if you took them and you made them go to a different school and make new friends.
And not only just the move and everything else. And,
right.
I was already commuting 3-4 days a week anyway, right? Traveling everywhere. And to go to New York.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's tough. And so that's one of those forks in your life that you make a decision, but it then allowed me to take some time off and kind of reconsider what I was doing and seeing how, we had built Ground Truth and said, well, maybe we can build a different way. And lo and behold, that all kind of moved together, but it didn't happen overnight, right? That year after, not going with Ground Truth or XAD at the time to the East Coast was kind of painful. There's a separation among your colleagues and friends about what they're doing, and you're kind of spinning in a different direction. And so anyway, it was great, kind of gave me a mid-career hiatus for a year. But then I just couldn't get myself out of the ad tech world. And that's where, Chalk came back in. But yeah,
really
absolutely,
tough.
You got to do that.
Craig, tell me a little bit more about the internal dialogue, maybe with just in your head or with your family, because I'm sure there's people right now listening who maybe are at a crossroads. They have to make a decision. And we all have been with COVID, right? I mean, it's changed a lot of things, but for you, when you were starting to, it's a strain personally on the family to be traveling that much, especially when you're used to being close. When you came to a decision to go, okay, I think I need to change, it's also tough because this is your baby. So what were the options for you in your mind of what you were going to do?
Yeah. So the options were, not to, separate the baby, right? We could say, well, why don't we have a different organization on the West Coast or something like that. I thought that would actually kind of the old adage, right? Where, you have a bike and two people and, you both want to split in half. Well, then both people don't have a bike that runs, right? And so sometimes somebody, for the bigger love has to give up the bike and let the other person be able to ride it around. And that really was the decision for me, is that I thought I cared so much about the company's success and future that for me, it was the right sacrifice. Plus I was blessed with a great family and I didn't want to disrupt that. And at the long term, work is important. But I think, if you look back on your life and your last few days and you say, wow, I moved my company, but then I lost my family. I don't think that would be the right thing to say. your epitaph. I think it'd be better to say I started something else or I did something else, but my family and I, were together. At least for me, that was the way to look at it more long
So when you
term.
laid out the options, you could go, okay, we could keep a branch here in San Francisco. I can run it. At that point, was there an option just to be virtual, or it's just not possible?
In 2012, I don't think a lot of people were thinking virtual, right?
Okay.
Plus, it was such an intensive face-to-face business, still is, right? And we decided that we were just going to leave engineering there, and I wasn't part of the engineering. I was the sales and marketing team. I had to be at the headquarters with the with all the salespeople. So it was kind of taking a different path. And I didn't want to change what I was doing. Plus I don't want to be running engineering when that's not really my skill set, or even we had very capable people running engineering, so that wasn't a fit. So it was actually maybe a blessing. The neat thing is that we had investors and we had boards that I had to we sat with everybody and we went through how do we do this, and I think actually ended up being great for them because everybody can get stronger in some ways because they're not relying always on Craig or whatever Craig was bringing or doing. So I think it ended up being really great, and I love doing Chalk, and I still talk to my Ground Truth friends. Those are still there. So that ended up being a blessing, I think.
So you just said, okay, it's got to be New York. I need to be present or not at all type of thing. And then you decide, well, because you could, I guess, also just stay on as like an advisor. But it sounded like, how do you decide to then part? Do you go, okay, you can buy my shares? Because you could have probably stayed on as just like a advisor too, I imagine.
Yeah, I did for about maybe 6 months or so. I had, an advisorship kind of thing. But it's weird where, for a while they continue to just talk to you about things, right? And because you still know what's going on, you can give some advice. But after maybe 6 months, if you're not in the business every day or talking to the same accounts or whatever's going on, then
you lose touch.
You lose touch, and it just kind of naturally goes through an organic, all of a sudden the phone doesn't ring as many times as it used to, or whatever it is. So that kind of just takes its own path. But the interesting thing about the stock you brought up was that there's, when you start a company, there's usually what we call founder shares, which are kind of given to you, and those are kind of granted. And then as you're there for a while, or you're, employees that weren't part of the founding team, you'll get options. And so I had a combination of those two over the years. And what I was able to do is work, and this is something maybe everybody should think about when they, exit, or especially if they have good relationships with the management in a company, just talk about, hey, give me 6 months or give me a year to make a decision about my stock. Heck, if you go public or you get bought, well, then everything's kind of easy to take care of because everything transacts and there's a change of ownership. But I'll give me a year to buy, especially when you have a decent amount of stock that you've compiled. You just can't write a check, especially now when you don't have a new salary coming in. So I asked for some time to make a decision, and therefore, let's just say there was a pot of stock, and I ended up grabbing more than half of it. I just didn't get all of it because there's only so much money you can try to cobble together on the shares. So that was kind of cool. I definitely suggest that for entrepreneurs and those that get in this situation about working with the management team, especially when you have a good relationship with them and the board, and saying, hey, I don't want to do anything disruptive. I want to actually help the company out from the outside, but just give me time to make decisions about my stock. And usually you'll end up returning some, unless you want to buy them all, which is great too for the company, right? They get a little liquidity off the strike prices. But for me, it was taking some off the table, and I still consider Ground Truth kind of like, I call it my 401k. Because I still have shares there and I wish them well. And I really don't run into them in what I do today. We're such at a different point in how we access partners and work with them that, I've never had anyone come up and say, okay, it's between you and Ground Truth. I've never heard that in a, agency discussion. They know that I have that background, which is kind of cool because it gives me some credibility instantly walking in and say, oh, you helped start, that company, which is really a masterful, large network. Ours is not as large, but it's based on how to get things done in an easier way. So anyway, hopefully that's kind of a nice anecdotal
That's interesting
story about how to kind of work with your founders. And again, at that time, Ground Truth had outside investors. So you had institutionals that were sitting on the board, right? So it's not like they're the most friendly gentlemen and ladies because they're all about the the investment, but they understood the importance of the team, and how you treat somebody like me will then reflect on the rest of the company. And they don't want to be working for a company that looks like an ogre, right? Or doesn't have compassion for people who put in years and years of service or do things right. So those are the kind of things that, if you're an entrepreneur and you're faced with that, you need to kind of bring those to the forefront and say, hey, listen, I want to do everything I can to help the company. It's just a change in life, or there's a different road I need to pursue. How do we work this together? And as soon as you get that going with your team or with a couple key board people or advisors, I think it really goes much smoother.
That's really interesting. I was not even thinking about that, but ultimately you can, a company could say, okay, well, I want to retain something, but then they will buy you out of whatever you don't want, so that you get some, kind of cushion to what your next thing is, but you also keep some of the blood and sweat and tears you poured into it, and you keep that for the future.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. Yeah. And I think that's, for most stock plans I've seen, I mean, it's not like there's some, special thing. I think most companies are set up with this, a common and some options, and they all have time bases on how long you take to make a decision. So, stretch on that. Even if it says in your paperwork, you have to make a decision within 60 days of leaving the company, you can sit down and talk and work with the board, especially if it's a large amount of shares. And I encourage you to do that, because you can also say, hey, I want to be the biggest advocate for the company, and I want to help you guys grow, even though I can't be part of it every day. There's a lot of things I can still do. And for me, I even, said I won't work in your space for a year. So another reason why I kind of took my hiatus and my sabbatical, mental, physical, and otherwise, was to just stay out of that space for a year, and really just separate. And it also gave me time to think about Chalk and other things I wanted to do. So, it's not like a bad thing. It's actually ends up being a really healthy thing if you can kind of clearly separate and have, some rules about how you want to be treated after you leave. And again, I'm not saying this is for, somebody who comes on board for 2 years or a year and a half, and they're a operational clerk. I'm not looking at those kind of people, but for all the founders on the call and the entrepreneurs that really are ground floor people, you have a lot more leverage than you think, both coming into the business and also leaving the business.
Really interesting. So thanks for sharing that. It probably was a really tough decision to make. It is actually,
right? You just, it's one of those things. But the more I do with my new business, Chalk, the less I even think about those kind of things, right? I'll tell you, for the first year or those, early months right after leaving Ground Truth or having that separation, you go to bed thinking about that every night, like what's going on, or did I make the right decision, or this is the right thing? And I can really, I don't think I slept well for those first 2-3 months after that. And then after a while, you kind of get your own cadence back, and, the compression is different. But everyone will try it out. I just don't think you should look at it as a black environment of, what bad might happen to you. You'd look at it as the good things.
Talk about, some of the leadership and team at Chalk. So when you decided to start this, and like who's involved now, because you tend to have these companies, you build a really good team around you. So it's not just you.
Yep. I can't do anything by myself, right? Or at least nothing of great, importance or consequences. I believe that, teams are the foundation, especially early on with entrepreneurs. It's the team that most people, bet on or invest in. Forget about the slideware or whatever you're presenting. It's usually 80% team is the weight that an investor makes. So to answer your question about what I did, I was very fortunate to have a good network. I did make a decision with the Ground Truth or XAD team that I wasn't going to poach anybody. Even after I take my year off, I'm not here to cause issues. But if somebody I knew at Ground Truth is already gone, who has left, that's fine. Nobody has an issue with that. So I started to kind of look at that. And that way, you have trust, especially today where you're working virtually, and you may not be seeing each other every day in the hallways or the office. You really have to, I think there's a paramount importance on working with people you already know or you have some trust with. And so for me, the leadership team ended up being the former head of technology for Ground Truth. He also had a couple kids, and And though he could stay back in the San Francisco area and not have to worry about New York, there was, there's always this kind of a divide. And so he decided on his own accord after a while that he wanted to make a break. And he said, Craig, I do like your vision about chalk and democratizing advertising. And so I was very blessed that I had the engineering horsepower very early on at chalk. And so the co-founder, Chandra Kolia, who was also the head of engineering for Ground Truth, ended up being my co-founder at chalk. And that helps a great deal. The other, I have a three-legged stool. The other component is a gentleman that I met back in the 90s who helped Sony get into a bunch of different businesses. His name is Satori Yuki. And again, going back to people you know and trust and you've done a lot of things with. And so Yuki runs all our international business, which today is actually dominant in our company. And for those that run a smaller company, on your call or listening to us on a podcast, a lot of them just never think about outside of the country they're operating within. And if you can find the right partners, going global is a really smart thing. And I'll tell you a real case here with chalk in the last 2 years with the pandemic. The U.S. And still today is kind of jiving and moving and trying to navigate itself through COVID. Other parts of the world, especially in Asia, they're more used to these pandemics. Wearing masks is not a statement of political sides either way. I don't want to get into that part of it. But because we had a lot of our business outside the US, we really navigated through COVID and actually ended up with one of our best years in 2020 because we weren't just in one market. And therefore, if that market catches cold, you get a cold. Here, even though US was down maybe 15, 25%, depending on the sector of advertising, we didn't experience that at all in other parts of our business. And so it really helped us, again, we didn't set up our business because of COVID that way. It just worked out that being, kind of global, even though you're a small company, is actually a smart thing.
Yeah, I love that, Craig. And if anyone goes to chalkdigital.com, you see there is Chalk Japan in the dashboard. And it is smart because a lot of people, I think myself included, definitely is like, we're not thinking international at all. And there's a big opportunity.
Right. And that's also why I said to you, you can launch a campaign anywhere in the world. I have to put a little asterisk qualifier for you on that, Jeremy. We don't run any advertising today or don't have access to North Korea.
Okay. I'm not sure what I would advertise there personally, but
no, but most of the partners we work with, we've got global access. We have servers, all across the planet, in servers, edge servers that allow us to, run advertising in all parts of the world, and which actually has ended up very kind of cool. I'll give you another anecdote. We have some advertisers, actually real estate agents in Mexico, and obviously they do run some advertising in Mexico, but they also really want to bring down folks that live in, the US and Canada and other parts of the world, especially when they live in these resort cities where the homes are more for, business travel or for families that, maybe are on a different spectrum of purchase. And they'll actually have us run their campaigns in different parts of the world just to kind of say, hey, have you ever thought about living in this part of the world? Or look at this, beautiful exotic home, which you'd never afford, maybe let's say in, California. Right. Could be very affordable in other parts of the world.
I've totally seen those. Like, come to Wisconsin or whatever.
You saw those ads.
Yeah,
those are
exactly. Yes. Let's go through a couple business applications. I don't know if you want to share your screen because I like the visual you were showing me before you hit record. And so if you want to share your screen and walk through a couple scenarios on how
I think that's
people
fun.
use Chalk Digital.
Yeah, I think it gives a little bit of what I call visual with the audio here. Let me do the screen share and we'll go for it. Here we go. That's perfect. All right. Yeah. So I have, 4 or 5 vignettes, really quick little thumbnails. I would say all of them had an agency component, meaning that an agency's involved in either creating the creative or they were the ones that wanted us to bring in the tool. So I think everybody can relate to, them being the kind of the central part of any campaign. So Wonderfront, I'll just use this as the first one. And because of the nature of our campaign or our platform being so real time, things like this, where you've got a live event, we're actually kind of a nice way to kind of promote it. This case, because we knew about, we had time to kind of schedule this, Wonderfront is a festival, probably ran 20, 30,000 people back in 2019. Obviously, 2020, it was canceled. It's going to come back on 2021. And where Chalk comes in is that we were able to, they told us who they thought their customer would be, or who would be somebody likely to come to this event. Had over 100 artists, 10 stages. I mean, it took over downtown San Diego. So what we did is we flooded about a 200-mile radius around the festival grounds. And we went on apps that had a lot of music centric, like the Pandoras and the Spotify's. And we served based on those kinds of signals that said if you've got that on your phone, you're probably more likely to be interested in music and you like music. And so we used that. And then we looked at the engagement levels. And because our platform is real time, we could actually collect those users. So next year, or this coming year, when we do the second inaugural event, we are going to go ahead and go back into our archives and pull out those consumers that we saw at the event, as well as those we reached, and let them know that Wonderfront's back on stage. So it's kind of an interesting use case. Closer to home, maybe not as big in scope, but local restaurants, especially today, where a lot of people don't know, hey, is my restaurant open yet or not? We're really
back to the roots of Chalk Digital.
Exactly right. That was probably the root of it, was that sign, the chalkboard with the daily special. Here we actually partnered with a FSI company, meaning a standalone insertion company that did like a printed flyer to homes. And so we took their printed flyer, made it into an ad unit. And so now in a neighborhood where you're canvassing, hundreds of homes, you're not only reaching them digitally, but you're also reaching them on print. And I'm a big omni-channel believer. I don't believe digital is better than offline. I think both of them together, they make them work better together. And so here, because they had a flyer being delivered, to the residents of, right? And then we were able to overlay that with our channel. You got really good for 14,000 impressions on top of the delivery. And we were only like 5% of the spin, right? Because the print is much more expensive than 14,000 ads. We drove great engagement, which in our world we call CTR, or click-through rates, of 78, which is 0.5%. That's really good. And then we got a lot of secondary actions, and coupons were downloaded, and phone calls, and allowed them to introduce that they were a brand new restaurant in the area. And obviously I do recommend that, have a compelling offer. And you can see here that it was a free lunch buffet.
That's compelling.
That's pretty good, right? I think the idea was that you have to go in there, buy a lunch, you'll get a lunch for free. Right. But again, that's how they did the execution. So it's kind of a neat way to do it.
Really quickly, Craig,
sure.
on that example.
Sure.
Your platform, and you can take that physical data and make it and serve up digitally.
Yep. Yeah. So two things we do to kind of translate that offline or that physical world to the digital virtual world is that we can take the creative, lift the key aspects and the look and the color and whatever the photos are, because that way you're being consistent about your messaging and your branding across the offline and the online. So that's the first thing we do. The second is we'll ask you, well, where are you serving today? Maybe you can actually show me your zip code list or your mail list or whatever it is. We'll bring that in, and then we'll match that list to a digital household level. And so we're actually overlaying our digital in the same homes that you're trying to serve physical. And I'll just give you some examples. What happens is if you did one or the other by themselves, they're both going to be fine. But when you put them together, there's this kind of a more of a air and ground attack. And they both do a much better job. And what we find is the homes that only get one piece, let's just say it does X. But what we find is if you do both, you get X plus 0.3. So you get a 30% bump when you kind of bring them both together. So things to think about, agencies is how do you coordinate different medias together is really key. And we think our platform helps you do that.
Oh yeah. I mean, with any marketing, I don't know what the stats are. I've heard various things. People need to see something 5 to 10 times before they take an action. So the more we see it, especially then there's more credibility, because you're like, well, I'm seeing them everywhere. They're on my phone. I'm getting the mailer and you feel like there's more credibility there as well. So
totally.
No, I love the multi-channel.
And I think also all of us consume content in different ways, right? If I'm in a household, there might be some people who do pick up the mail and they're the one that will maybe see that flyer, but the rest of the family didn't see that flyer, right? So, and other people in the home might see the digital and not the other way around. So it's really smart to kind of combine the two, or combine 3 or 4.
Love it. So what was the next one?
Oh yeah, sorry. So next one is a kind of again, still very local in nature. That's one of the core pieces of our company, is that we like to have a local component. Though we've run national campaigns for folks, at the end of the day, we all think that everything's still local at some level. Here, what we've done is we've built a whole suite of ads. They're templates for Berkshire agents. And so when they log in, we already know what their headshot looks like. We already know all the specifics about them. So when they go to launch a campaign, 90% of that campaign is already built before they even did anything. And all they need to do is kind of paint or enter the location they want this ad to run in. Like maybe it's a farming territory, or it's consistent with a mail list again. And these just overlay. And then we give them a dashboard. It gives them all the reporting. And so it's kind of what we call a franchise use of our platform. So any agency that's working with a franchise, they're always trying to figure out, well, I can work with corporate on the national campaign, but how do I help the rest of the network out? And so we actually can help them bridge those kind of solutions by giving them a tool that they can actually give to their client, leveraging the creative they did for corporate. And now it's kind of a brand consistent kind of game, because as you know, real estate agents, or maybe you don't know, but real estate agents, even though they might have a business card that says Berkshire or Coldwell or whatever they say, they're still really independent operators. And so there's only so much that the brand can do. They can say, hey, please use my tool, and please don't mess up my logo, and please use the right color. But at the end of the day, if an agent goes down the street to one of their friends to run an ad and they kind of squish the ad or they screw it up, it's running.
It's still representing.
It's still representing. So, the brands are kind of always perplexed about, how do I keep my brand consistent, which helps everybody, but also allow them to have their own autonomy. And so our platform, I think, walks that fine line where it's been set up by the brand folks and the marketing people. So they know it's going to look great. And you can see here, it's even in different languages. So they don't have to be an expert. If they want to run a campaign in a different part of the world, they can. And so, this is a really good example of how we kind of go in at a very high level, but also it waterfalls down to the local agent to run their own business.
Yeah. I guess the question I have with that is, who's using the platform? So an agency could use it for franchises. And do the real estate companies sometimes come on and use it? Or would some of the individual real estate people use it? Or at what level is it? Okay, no, Jeremy, it's the agency and the larger company, and the real individual real estate people are really not using it on that level. Who's typically using it?
So I'll answer the question at the highest level, and then I'll give you exactly how the Berkshire piece is doing it. So in Chalk, we have a platform that it's actually comes in 2 different flavors. One for an agency, where they have it's a centralized platform just for them, and all their clients live in there, and they can actually open up any client they want and do the work they need to do. The other product we have is an enterprise product, which we then drop into a company like Berkshire, where the sell-in is to the company, the corporate entity, and we set everything up and we make it walk and talk the way they want. And it goes inside of their toolbox for, where their commission checks are and where all the other tools are. There's a button that says Chalk on it. And therefore, it's been set up by corporate, but it's for the individual agent to operate it. So it's been dumbed down. Like the way the workflow works is very simple. Like I say a 5th grader could read and understand what the screens are trying to do, so that you don't have to be an expert. The agency product, our platform, very sophisticated, or we dial it up and allow them to have a lot more tools, because that's their business and they understand it. And so you'll see a lot more levers and buttons, and it's a lot more technical. I would never try to have an agent or any small business get interfaced with the agency product. It's just overwhelming. Not because it's technical or hard. It's just it's giving them things that only an agency can appreciate.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the way we go to market. So in this scenario, we actually have 2 customers. I've got corporate who's set the table. I work with them, and we actually do some things for them that at a corporate level too. But the real bulk of the business is allowing the 50,000 agents plus in the United States, and brokers have access to their own tools.
I love it. Craig, I think we have time for one more case study.
Okay.
So I'd love you to share it. And I just want to point people towards chalkdigital.com. Check it out. This has been great. Craig, I really appreciate your time and sharing all of this.
Yep.
What's the last one we should
I
take
think
people home with?
Okay, this one is to me actually the perfect full circle of the beginning of Chalk, which I mentioned to you, like take a photo of something like a chalkboard on the front of your business and propagate it out. So we're working with a huge recruiting firm, top 3 in Asia. And this is not the recruiting firm that maybe all of us on this podcast would want, meaning an executive recruiting firm trying to find your job. This is actually a team of about 1,000 salespeople that goes door to door to local businesses and says, "Oh, I need a cashier, I need a clerk, I need a wait staff." Your hourly, seasonal, part-time workers. It's a very different market. And what they do is they go in there with their phone and they can actually take a live photo of the business or the team. And these ads, you can see that, you probably can't read them all, but these ads are basically saying, "Come join us, come work for us." And some actually even say it's $12 an hour, and it's flexible time. And what we're doing is, because the business is actually trying to find these staffs, we're putting a very tight, what I call circles or bubbles around these businesses, because it's doing 2 things. One is letting local people know, hey, if I need a part-time job, I'm not going to go across the country for a part-time job, right? I can't even get there transportation-wise. This is local, part-time, and on top of it, it also, if you're not interested in the job, it makes you think about that business again, and you think about them. And so it's actually doing a little bit of double duty. It's helping the business grow by promoting its product or service, because usually you've got a picture of whatever you're selling in there, like the sandwich or the food or whatever. But you're also letting people know, hey, we're growing, we need staff.
It does double duty.
Double duty. So this is a perfect, I couldn't have dreamed of a better use of Chalk, which is it's local. You can personalize it. Some of like the McDonald's one here in the middle, you can see that's a corporate stock photo, which is fine. We allow you to put that in. But the other ones, and so is Mossberger on the bottom. But the other 3 are Donkey at the top, Amazon and Costco. Those are real live photos. Those are actual, authentic photos of the team and the business saying, "Come on in and work for us." And I think that's a really kind of a powerful story about how local advertising kind of bonds you with your community. So anyway, that's what we're doing here. And this is, I think, hopefully a nice one to kind of put a cherry in the top for where we've been and what we've done. And here's a large company using us both at a corporate level, but also at the local ground level, trying to find jobs for people today, which is a huge thing because of all the disruption from the last year.
Craig, I want to be the first one to thank you. Everyone, check out chalkdigital.com. Check out more episodes of the podcast. Check out Rise 25. And Craig, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Jeremy. Love to follow up with anybody who has questions, and love your podcast. I think you've convinced me I need to do one of these every couple of weeks.
100%.
All right,
so
buddies.
people can contact you through chalkdigital.com, through Contact Us. Are there any other better places?
And actually, I'm an open book here. Just reach out to me at craig@chalkdigital.com. That's my email.
Cool.
Happy to follow up with any of your audience and your business.
Cool. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, buddy.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side.